And Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. And Doris, you've been following all of the recent news surrounding the civil workforce, and you say we're witnessing an attempt to return to the old spoils system, one which was heavily utilized by President Andrew Jackson, in which workers were hired and fired based on party loyalty rather than merit. Tell us what you're seeing and where you're seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, there's a real echo to today. And President Jackson, he came in a movement of the populist movement against the elites. He decided that once he won the election, to the victor goes the spoils. So he replaced many of the civil servants from there with his own people, party people, friends of them, who were loyal to him. And it lasted then from that time, from the 1830s until after the Civil War. And then the situation was that the government became much more complex. They needed experts in what they were doing. They couldn't just have friends of the party. So there became a movement for civil service reform. And Mark Twain was one of the great advocates of this movement. He said, would you really hire a secretary who didn't know the alphabet? Would you really hire a blacksmith who didn't know how to use a sledgehammer? We have ignoramuses in our government right now. We've got to change it. So the movement began, it gathered steam, but it just never could gain traction because this other system was so entrenched until finally in 1880, President Garfield ran as a reform candidate, and 6 months later, he was assassinated by a disappointed job seeker. So that finally created the emotion, and then when the guy was hung, there was more emotion, the guy who had assassinated him, and finally in 1883, the modern civil service was created, where you had a merit system, you had to take a civil service exam, and you were appointed on your who you were, not who you were, what you knew, rather than who you were. And that system has lasted until 130 years, until right now.
Doris, first of all, congratulations on your lunch with the FT. I loved reading it last weekend. It made me smile from start to finish. That was so much fun.
Thank you. He's such a character.
It was great. I would recommend it to everybody, and you were wonderful. Obviously, presidents throughout history have tried to test the limits of their power and push it as far as they possibly could. Donald Trump is not the first to do so, but some constitutional lawyers are suggesting that it's almost that he is defying the Supreme Court and the courts in this moment, partly because, as Bob Reich was just suggesting, some of these executive orders are rather sloppily written, and we heard that earlier in the program too. Do you see any parallels in history to what Donald Trump is doing now in terms of expanding as far and as fast as he can, even perhaps thinking, well, I don't really care whether I'm stepping outside the law on this one?
Well, certainly in my lifetime, I really have not seen this kind of a urge for changing things and changing them in such a way that is so hurtful to the people who are being involved. I mean, you can't even imagine what the federal workforce feels right now. Morale was already down because trust in government has been diminished over a period of time. And now people who are veterans, I mean, you know, a lot of people in the federal workforce are military people who went into civil service afterwards. They don't know what's happening. There's uncertainty. There's a better way of doing this. I mean, if you wanted to really look at the civil service and see if there was some sort of bloatedness, then you go to Congress, you have the agency do its own internal thing, but you just say we're closing these agencies down and they're no good. And people have given their lives for this kind of work. You don't make a lot of money. What they do in terms of national parks, what they do in terms of cybersecurity, it's a really important thing, and we should be valuing these people who've come into public life. And instead, he's just with a broad stroke using his power to say they're all bad and we're going to take them away and take the protections away. There are protections. The courts will get involved. But once you have a public sentiment that says these people aren't doing their job, what we really need now is a fighter who fights for telling us what the government workers do. I mean, that's what Teddy Roosevelt did. He finally came in. The civil service still wasn't working very well. He becomes commissioner for 6 years, and he fights on behalf of civil service. He finds the corruption in the system. He finds that all the civil service workers were being taxed 3% of their salary to give to the party in order to stay in, that they were fixing the exams. And he said that a central tenet of democracy, and we should remember this today, is that a merit system is there so the farmer's son and the mechanic's son has an equal chance to get a job as the friend of the president or the friend of the party in power. And he made that system work. And as I said, it worked for 130 years, and it's still working. And we need somebody, we need Teddy Roosevelt to fight for that civil service today. It is a central tenet of democracy to have that merit system work.
So, Doris, that civil service, that bureaucracy that's under fire that Trump is targeting, his hatchet man, Elon Musk. He's the one who's behind the buyout package offered to so many of these federal employees. He's the one who's in USAID. He and his team have accessed the computer systems at the Treasury Department. His influence goes on and on. I wrote about it today and note that, of course, Musk did not receive a single vote. He didn't get confirmed. He does not even receive a government paycheck, though he is technically a White House employee, a special employee. Can you think of any comparisons, any other private citizens who wielded this much power in shaping, reshaping, slashing the federal government like Musk is doing now?
No, I mean, I think what happened in the old days where there would be party bosses in all the states, and the party bosses had alliances to business, and then they had alliances to government. It was trying to be a triple alliance, and they would have power, but not like this, not in a day of media as we are today, where every day we're seeing him making statements. And I think you're right, he's unelected. Even if this were going to be a look at the federal government and look at what could be changed, that should be done in alliance with the president and the Congress and the people who are part of all this. To do this shock and awe thing, it just is going to create such uncertainty and such sadness among the people who are there that you may be losing them even before you start shaving them from the thing. You've lost their morale, you've lost their spirit. It's just incomprehensible to me why it's being done this way, if it's going to be done at all.
Presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, thank you very much for your insights this morning. And